Hello and welcome to the Midnight Quilt Show, where we celebrate the best time of the night, where the house is quiet and it's finally quilting time. Tonight, I'm working with a feathered star quilt pattern, which can be pieced with templates or without. I wonder which one I'll choose. Let's get to it. So this kit comes with the Boundless Batiks, and I'm going to show you the beautiful fabrics that I'm going to be working with today. The pattern itself is called Surfer's Point, and it's designed by Edyta Sitar. And I love how it's not your basic easy quilt pattern. I'm going to get to try some new things for me, like partial seams, and it kind of expand my template piecing skills, so we'll see how that goes. But from the dark blues to the light blues to the beautiful greens, this is gonna be a beautiful quilt. I can't wait to get started. In fact, the more I look at it, the more I think I've coordinated my snack choice tonight. Well, I gotta get cutting. So this pattern comes with templates, which I've already traced and cut out of my template plastic. Now I could use these to actually cut out the pieces by laying it down, tracing them, and cutting them out, and that does sound slightly appealing. But I think what I'm gonna do is actually use my rotary cutter to cut them out. But I still wanna keep these little pieces around because I'm gonna use them to check and make sure that the pieces that I've cut out are actually correct. So it's kind of like an answer key, or kind of like, you know, my fail safe. So we'll see how that works. Now another thing that she's done that I love is that she's given me the diagram to cut up this fat quarter to get all the pieces out of it that I need for each block. So I'm just gonna follow her instructions and carve this up like a turkey. And I think the reason she included the templates was very smart because these are some unusual sizes. So here's my first square. I need some other triangles. So this next one that I'm cutting is actually going to be the diamond shape. You can see the template that I'm working with. And I could lay my template on here and go ahead and cut, but I'm gonna actually use these lines on the mat to help keep me on track. So what I'm gonna do is look for the 45-degree line, line it up here, and give my little strip here, my first 45-degree cut. That's not the 45-degree line. This one is the 45-degree line. Is it bad I had to call my 6th grader up to give me a little primer on math? I know math, just not the angles and stuff. So now that I have that 45-degree angle cut out, I know that this is gonna be a 2-inch wide diamond, so I'm just gonna lay the 2-inch line on my ruler parallel with that. And then when I cut it, it's going to give me that diamond shape. It saves me a little bit of time instead of marking that template out, and anytime I can save on the piecing means I have a little bit more time for the quilting. Ooh, I'm cutting my life away, ain't no better way for me. Sorry, I'm a child of the 80s. So the next one to cut out of here is the 10-inch square, which I'm gonna end up turning into the little bitty triangles that I need for my feathered star. And I've cut into my little triangles, which are also gonna be part of the bigger block. So I've got this fat quarter all carved up, but what's great about this quilt is instead of mixing in the different colors, this is all the pieces I need for one complete block. So all I have to do is keep them together in a nice pile, that way I don't misplace them, and you'll see how they come together in just a moment, because first I have to cut the background fabric to put with this. So out of the background fabric, I'm cutting the pieces that are gonna go around the star, and that includes the larger triangle and the square, so I'm gonna get that going. Now that I cut up my square, I can use my template just to line it up and make sure that it's pretty good. Look at that. There's like a sense of validation in that. Like, yes, that was perfect. Good job, Angela. I always say you have to be your biggest fan, right? Just a couple more pieces and I'm ready to start sewing this block together. So the first part of this block takes these little half square triangles and some of the other pieces that I've already cut out. And what I'm going to do is just arrange them so you can kind of see how they're gonna go together. Now I kind of feel like this might be like a game of tanagrams, you know, where you're arranging the little blocks. See, I've already made this one make a little winky face. See, there's the mouth and the wink and the eye. And now it's a pirate. Okay, sorry, back to the subject at hand. So these little things are going to be laid out like this. And basically I need 2 rows of 3 half square triangles. They're gonna look something like that. Basically, they're all pointing the same way. At least this is what I tell myself when I'm making it to help keep me on track. And you should have some of these left over when you're done. So now I'm gonna sew them in strips like this. For some reason, the reversing of these blocks and the way they change direction, I have to lay it out first because I've made it wrong a few times. I did a little test block on this to make sure it wasn't above my skill level. And so I'm gonna chain piece these, which means I'm just gonna grab 2 of them, sew right onto here and then continue on. Go right into my next row. Then I'm actually going to chain piece the next section without cutting these. Since they're all together, I'm going to keep them that way and then just feed them through while they're still connected. So here's my next segment, and you can see if I open it up, I can take my next little block and line it up and make sure that it's going the same direction. And that just helps make sure that they end up the way they're supposed to, which is always a great thing. So now I have 8 total little strip sets, and I'm going to trim them up and start the next part of this process. So these strip units aren't quite done yet. I have to use these little triangles on either side, and it's gonna go something like this. Now what helps me when I'm laying these out is to remember that these background triangles are all facing the same direction. So even though they're reversed, they're same right here and to right there. I mean, I don't know if that'll help you out if you're making one, but that's just what helps me. That and some M&Ms, that always helps. Now I just sew, sew, and sew. Kind of like sew your blocks all day or night. Midnight. Hold on, where'd it go? I'm missing a triangle. Little triangles, polka dot. You seen it? Oh, there it is. Okay, so my little pieces are together. I just need to separate them, iron them up, and then there's another little strip unit I have to make, and then I'm ready to finally start putting the blocks together. So let's do that. So I've laid out the pieces for the next strip that I need to put together. And what I'm gonna do is sew them, in one long row, kind of like this, and then this. But what's gonna happen is now I have to start dealing with some weird angles. They're not all right angles, have these kind of more pointy ones, but don't worry, I'm gonna show you how easy it is to put them together. But the next one that it's gonna go with, as you can tell, has the right angle and then the more acute angle right here. So the thing to remember is these two angles are the same, they're the right angle, so those are gonna line up. And then the skinnier angle or the more acute angle is gonna extend past it, which is fine. That's what's gonna help give us our 1/4 inch seam allowance after I sew it together. At least in my world, that's what's supposed to happen. And then when I pull it out, you can see that it lines up perfectly. And that right there is gonna give us our 1/4 inch seam so that I don't lose that point when I put it together. Now when I go to add the next piece, I think this would be a parallelogram, if I'm correct. You can tell that none of these really have angles that are the same. So as I lay them on top of each other, I know that that skinnier, pointier one is gonna extend past this angle, so I'm just gonna scoot it over a little bit. And if I folded this back the way it came, you could tell that those actually are supposed to line up too. Once it's all together, you can tell I have a nice, somewhat straight row, and then I need to do that with the rest of these blocks. So now that I'm done with all those strip units, I'm ready to start making the bigger pieces of my block, and I'm gonna start with the side units, which has a triangle of the background fabric, and then those first strip units that I made earlier. And the way that they're gonna be laid on here will be something like this. So it's gonna make a weird looking shape. I hope that it should come all together in a nice square when we're done. So starting first with this one, I'm gonna put it on a background triangle and sew it on. Now here's where things get kind of interesting because it's gonna be a partial seam. Yes, a partial seam. Now when I first read the pattern, I thought there's no way I can do this. I know my kids picked out the fabric, they love it, but I'm just not into that kind of complex stuff. But then I realized that it's not a Y seam. It's not where multiple pieces of fabric come together. It just means I sew the seam, stop, and I'll come back and finish it later, which actually fits in really great with my ADD type of personality. So what I'm gonna do is start my line of stitching right here. I'm not gonna start at the very end. I'm gonna start right here and then go down to the side. So here's the first step, and then I'm gonna take the other strip unit, the one that has the colored fabric on the end, and stick it right there. And again, I'm not gonna sew that part of the seam, I'm gonna start here, and these are gonna stay out in kind of like little wings. And here's the next step. It's almost done, I just have to add these two little pieces on the side, and I probably should be pinning this. And there is one of my side units. I just need to make 3 more. So I have the side units done, and I have to work on the corner units, which are gonna use up the last of these little strips that I've made. I'm gonna use a square, 2 of those, and it's gonna come together to make a weird shaped looking block, but I'm thinking it's all gonna come together perfectly in the end. All right, 3 more of those and I can put the block together, finally. So I have all the pieces to my beautiful feathered star block, but before I sew them together, I want to point out one little thing. So I haven't trimmed my little dog ears off of the pieces, and it really is something I probably should do, but since this quilt is going to end up on my couch where we all cuddle under it, if it's not perfect, I think it'll be fine. I pulled out the pieces for the first row of my block because I want to show you what happens with this partial seam when I actually sew it together. So the hardest part about sewing this block together is I have this one area where I have 3 different pieces of fabric coming together. So what I'm going to do is try to move the fabric to where those points kind of meet. So where this white point will touch that purple kind of point, roll it over, kind of hold it in place, and then squeeze it with my fingertips so it doesn't shift so that I can pin it so it'll stay. And I'm gonna go ahead and sew along my seam. As I approach that point, I'm gonna go ahead and pull my pin out, and as I'm sewing, I'm gonna try to make sure that it doesn't cross over that point, which I can tell by the seams that I've already sewn before. All right, here's the moment of truth. We get to see how those turned out. That is not good, but we're gonna leave it. See, that should be over here. It's fine. So now I gotta finish up my row. I still have this partial seam that I have to go back and finish up. And it's very important that I do, because when I get to quilting, if I have a big old hole like that, we know it's not gonna end well. So I'm gonna turn it over, line this up, and starting where I finished that seam, I'm gonna just finish that whole row out and then be done with this part of the block. And now you can see that it finally comes together and it's starting to look more like your traditional quilt block. Now I just need to do the same with the other side. All right, that point actually looks pretty good where those fabrics come together. So there you go, 50%. I'll take it. And I'm gonna finish up that partial seam. Then I have the first row of my quilt. Now I need to do the center section. Now when I'm sewing these pieces together, when I'm looking at it, I usually try to have the piece on top that has the most pieces, if that makes any kind of sense. There's no seams or anything here, so if I can keep them all on the top, that lets me maneuver my points and maybe fudge a little bit to make sure it looks decent. And as you can see, those points look perfect. And I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. All right, and there is my center row. Then the top. And now I'm gonna try to make all these weird things come together. Now starting from one side, I'm gonna move this out of the way. Remember, there's that partial seam that we're not ready for yet. And I'm gonna line it up along the side. All right, let's see how it turned out. Not so bad. I just need to go back and close up these partial seams like I did on this row, and I'll be 2/3 of the way done with this block. Now I'm just gonna sew that bottom row on just like I did the first, and then my block will be finished. So there it is, my finished block. And it just so happens I have all the blocks for the first row already ready to go. So I'm gonna sew the first row together and then assemble the rest of the quilt row by row. Woo, this quilt is finished. And the best thing about it is there are no borders. So that means all I have to do is make my quilt sandwich with my beautiful batik backing and get to machine quilting, which we all know is my favorite part. But first, an M&M break. What, like you don't carry M&Ms in your pockets? So for this quilt, I'm opting to use the swirl hook all over design. And what I love about it is that it takes that basic swirl and adds a little hook to it, which is great for the pointy areas of this quilt. So I'm basically quilting your regular swirl by quilting a line that curls in on itself. But once I get to the center, I'm gonna stop and quilt a little hook or an extended kind of curl out to a point. Then I'm going to echo back and then echo around the swirl. And that's a basic shape that I'm repeating over and over and over again. And I love how this design really fills in the whole area. It has a nice little pointy element to it, which looks great with the piecing. And I also love how an all-over design hides any piecing imperfections, not that there are any on this quilt. Now, if you're up for staying all night with your machine quilting, I have a fun quilting diagram that you can download by checking out the description box below. And it shows how you can use the negative space in this quilt to create a cool custom effect. Well, I've got a lot of swirl hooks to quilt, so I'm gonna get to it. So tonight, I finally conquered my fear of partial seams and made my first ever feathered star quilt. I had so much fun cutting up the batiks, sewing them together, and then quilting it with an all-over swirl hook design, and I couldn't be more happy with the result. Now I have a question for you. I have started to amass quite the collection of scraps, and I'm not sure how I should organize it. I'd love to hear how you organize your scraps. I mean, if you hypothetically had any scraps of fabric. Be sure to leave your suggestions in the comment box below so I can see which way I want to organize mine. Don't forget to download those quilting diagrams and be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode of the Midnight Quilt Show. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next week.